All right, so we're going to start a new assignment together. It's just going to be kind of reinforcing some of the concepts I've introduced to you so far, making symbols, making simple animations. I'll show you some more ins and outs of some animation, some different types. But the first thing we want to do when we start a new project in any way is to set up a new folder for it. So I'm going to go grab my Finder. And I'm on my desktop. You should choose just a good spot for you, wherever you want to work. And I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call this Sunrise. All right, so I always use the naming convention of I capitalize my folder, and then I make the same FLA file name inside of it, lowercase. You can do it however you like, as long as you're consistent with the way you name things. That's really helpful down the road. So I have a Sunrise folder here, capital S, and now I'm going to create a new document. And if you recall, we're always going to use an HTML5 document inside of this class. And then I've already got the default set, 960 by 540 and 30 frames a second. I'll show you again. Actually, I see they have the make default button here now. So if you don't already have these things pre-filled out, you should go ahead and set that up now. Make sure your width is 960, your height is 540, the frame rate is 30, and then click make default before you click create. So then the next time it'll open up with those exact things and you can just create it a little quicker. And again, that size just comes from a research project we did a few years ago about a size that would look good on most browsers in desktop and laptop situations, but would also fit most modern smartphones without necessarily having to scale too much. So just kind of a common denominator size. And in here, got our timeline ready and ready to build some stuff. The first thing we're going to make in our gorgeous sunrise here is we're going to make the ground. In fact, I'm going to name my layer first before I even create anything. And I'm going to name this layer ground. And I typically keep layer names and any kind of symbol names or anything that I create all lowercase. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into some basic programming. It's a programmer thing. Just gives you less opportunity to have mistakes or have things that don't match up if you don't use capital letters or only use them in a specific way. So I've got my layer named ground, and now I want to draw a box. I'm going to start by selecting the rectangle tool and then looking at its options over in the properties over here. All right. And I want to create a box for my ground. I want to take the fill color and I'm going to choose some kind of green. It's a nice ground green. And I'm going to have no stroke. I want this to have no stroke. So again, you can select the stroke color and just choose the white box with a red line through it to not have a stroke, have just a fill color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a box that goes maybe about, I don't know, about a third of the way up. Doesn't have to be exact. And I'm going to make sure and draw it so that it goes out past the ends on the sides and the bottom of the stage. So I make sure and fill the stage like this. All right. So just drew my box like that. That is my ground. And once I've drawn it, I want to select it. And now I'm going to make a symbol out of it. I'm going to use F8, which is the quick way to do it. But you can also right-click, create symbol, choose modify, create symbol, or you can even use this little icon here. And we're going to make sure we keep it a graphic symbol. And we're going to go ahead and leave the registration point in the middle. There'll be other times where we may want to move the registration point, but we'll leave it in the middle of type graphic, and then I'm going to name it ground, the same way I named the layer. Again, I'm kind of looking forward to the fact that we may animate this ground, and we want it to be a symbol and be the only thing in the layer. So I check my library, I should see my ground symbol, and I should see that it is indeed a graphic symbol, the three little shapes like this. And we have some ground. Now, I want to point out something in the interface that, once you draw something kind of outside the bounds of the stage, if you ever want to see what it looks like, um, besides hitting Command Return and publishing it, obviously, but there's this little box right up here next to the Zoom dropdown, which allows you to clip the contents outside the stage. So I can select that, and it just clips everything and shows me only what's in the stage area and only what's going to be published inside the browser. So it's kind of neat, but sometimes it's worthwhile to realize if maybe you can't see things outside of the stage, if you feel like you should, sometimes you can do that. And then those other two buttons I've talked before about being able to, if you're on a touchpad, you can actually take your 2 fingers and you can rotate this around as you're drawing, which can be real helpful if you're drawing and using the stylus. But sometimes you can do it accidentally. You can also use this button right here. Whoa, just accidentally dragged it off the screen. You can also use this button to kind of do it manually with your mouse around a specific pivot. But if you accidentally do that, or you do it and you want to get it back, it's this little button right here centers it back to where it started. So anyway, I'm going to leave it where I can see the contents outside of the stage for now. All right, so we got a ground layer. Let's go ahead and lock that ground layer. It's very common practice to lock layers that you're not currently using so you don't accidentally nudge something. And let's make a new layer above the ground. Let's call it sky. Actually, let's put the ground above the sky. I'll show you why in a minute. So we got our sky layer is down below our ground. And we're going to draw another amazing box. We'll make this more exciting in a moment, but for now we're just going to box things out. So I'm going to go back to the rectangle tool, go back to my properties panel. And once again, I want no stroke, and I'm going to fill this time with some kind of sky color. And I want to do the same thing where I'm going to make sure and fill the whole stage. I'm going to make sure, I'm going to make sure that I go underneath, or at least it might snap. Mine's snapping right to the ground when I get near it, which is fine, just as long as you go underneath it and fill it in so it fills the whole thing in. And once you've created your sky box, go ahead and hit F8 or create a symbol, make a graphic symbol called sky. And what I haven't done yet is actually save this. Right now it says up here in the upper left, it says untitled 1, the canvas. I'm going to hit save, Command S. You can go up to File, Save. And then I'm going to navigate to my folder on my desktop, what I called Sunrise. I'm going to save sunrise.fla, lowercase, inside of that. And we're going to move on and make our ground horizon line a little more exciting. Okay, so now I'm going to lock my sky layer and unlock my ground layer. And I want to make changes to my ground. I don't like this flat, boring horizon line. I want to put some glorious rolling hills in there. I'll show you how we're going to do that. So I want to edit the ground symbol though. I don't want to do it on this level, at this main root scene 1 level where I've got my ground and my sky layers. I want to actually go inside of the ground symbol into the edit symbol mode. And again, as long as my layer is unlocked, I can do that by double clicking and going inside of it. And when I'm inside of it, I should see this breadcrumb trail up here with scene 1 and ground. So I can always click on scene 1 or the arrow to get back. When I double click, I'm inside of ground. It's showing this as the furthest right in this kind of breadcrumb trail up here. And I can also see that my layers change. So it just says layer 1 now, and it's got this shape on it that if I wanted, I could actually grab a piece of. That lets us know it's a shape. Whenever I do something simple like that and move, I always use Command Z or undo to set it back. So I definitely use undo a lot, something to be aware of. So now what I want to do, we can go ahead and leave this on the same layer, but what I want to do is I want to create some rolling hilltops. So let's grab the pencil tool. All right, it's the one directly above the rectangle tool. And with the pencil tool, now the pencil tool only draws a stroke. So I want to select this stroke color. For me right now is set to black. I'm going to select it, and then I can drag over, and the little eyedropper can grab the exact color of my ground that I use, which is what I want. And then the pencil option, smoothing, set to 50. I want you to look at this option for pencil mode right here that's at the top of these tool parameters here. You can see there's straighten, smooth, and ink. Straighten will draw jaggedy ass lines, smooth will try and draw nice and smooth lines, and ink will like follow every single pixel. Now I have a stylus pen right now, so I can kind of draw smoothly, but if you're using a mouse or your finger on a trackpad, however we do it, you want to make sure smooth is checked, which should be the default, but just in case, I want you to be aware of those different options under the pencil tool. Be sure you choose smooth. The stroke size, we can leave at 1, and we're ready to draw our hilltops. Now for this part, I'm going to lock my sky layer and keep my ground layer unlocked, main timeline here. And what we're going to do next is make our ground layer a little more exciting. So I'm going to double click on the ground symbol to go inside of it. And again, you see the breadcrumb trail up here to get back up is very, very important. That's why I keep talking about it, is just getting used to going in and out of symbols and changing to be on that particular symbol's timeline. So we're on what's referred to as the root timeline or the main timeline or scene 1 here at the very top with our ground and our sky layers. And I'll double click to go inside of the ground symbol, and now I'm inside of my ground symbol's timeline with just a single layer 1. All right, so from here, I'm going to use the pencil tool. And for this part, go ahead and just watch me do this for a moment. And I want to show you exactly how to do this, and then I'll give you a minute to set your own. So I'm going to choose the pencil tool, which is directly above the rectangle tool. And I'm going to look at the properties, and it shows me that I'm going to look at the tool properties under pencil. And I want the color of what I'm going to draw to be the same color as my ground. So I selected this stroke color, move it over here, and use the eyedropper to select the ground. And I talked about this smoothing option. We're going to leave it on smooth rather than straighten or ink, which should help us draw some nice smooth rolling hills. And I'll leave the smoothing 50% down here. And now what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to draw some rolling hills, but I'm going to do 2 very specific things as I draw them, which is why I want you to watch. Number 1 is I'm going to keep it all 1 stroke. I'm not going to keep lifting and stopping and clicking again. Later on, we're going to try and use this curve in another situation. But I'm also going to start my hills. I'm going to click. I'm actually going to make sure I'm inside of the stage. So I don't want to start them like outside past this line. In fact, I could use this clip to stage thing. In fact, I think I'm going to. I'm going to clip the stage so I don't get confused by that. But I'm going to start inside the stage. But I'm also going to make sure that when I click and start my hill line, I'm going to start under the horizon. So I'm going to start in the actual green. So I'm going to click. And now as I hold, I'm just going to draw these glorious hilltops. And then when I end it, I also want to end it down here on the stage underneath in the ground like that. So when I've done that, now if that's 1 smooth stroke that I've drawn, and it's pretty smooth because we put it on smooth, as long as I'm on the stage and I'm actually touching this line, now that I have that stroke drawn, I should be able to use the fill tool, which is this little paint bucket, and again, change the color of the fill to that green. And now because this is just raw shapes, because we're inside of the symbol, I should be able to click anywhere in here and fill in my landscape to be these glorious hills. And now that I've filled that in, I'm going to go back up to scene 1, lock my ground layer, and save my file. So we have these rolling hills, ground or sky. We're up at scene 1. Next thing is let's make a sun layer. Going to make a new layer, name it sun. And I'm actually going to stick this layer in between ground and sky because I want the sun to be able to go behind the hills but still stay on top of the sky. All right. So with this new sun layer in between ground and sky, now I'm going to take the oval tool and we're just going to make a simple little circle sun for right now. There'll be an opportunity later on to add some detail to it. But for right now, with the oval tool, I'm going to go over here. And once again, I want no stroke. So I'm going to change the stroke color to this little box with a line through it. And the fill, I'm just going to choose a nice yellowy, I'll choose the actual bright yellow sun. And somewhere up here in the upper right quadrant, I'm going to hold shift while I draw my sun to make sure it's a perfect circle. And I want you to draw a nice little sun that still has some reasonable room around it. So we're going to add some sun rays here shortly. But just draw yourself a nice little circle for the sun right here. And as you might expect, once you draw it, I want you to select it and create a symbol out of it named sun. Once again, a graphic symbol. All right, now that we have our little sun in the sky here, we're actually going to start animating. So once you have these three pieces, now we're ready to animate because we have handled the 2 golden rules of animating in this program, and each of these objects is each one is a symbol. Remember, it's got to be a symbol first before it gets animated. And they're also each the only thing on their own respective layer. So the first thing that we need to do before we start animating is we need to give ourselves some time to work with. So let's go all the way out to 3 seconds or 90 frames. You can kind of see both of those in the timeline. And let's select all 3 layers like that, and then add frames. Now, once again, I use the hotkeys. I would highly recommend you get used to using the hotkeys because it is faster. So I'm just going to hit F5, and that adds my frames. But if you want to do it manually with your selection, you can use this button right here, but make sure that you have it set on frame rather than keyframe or blank keyframe. And that'll allow you to, oops, I just added one. That'll allow you to add frames, or you can right click and choose add frames, or you can do it through the pull down menu. But as we move forward, I'm just going to refer to the hotkeys because that's what I use. And it's just much, much faster if you have a keyboard and set that up. So we have 3 seconds of animation to work with. Great. What I would like to do is have, for the first second, I want to make my sun rise for the first second. All right. Now, a lot of times when you're animating, you kind of go backwards in the sense that the sun is already where I want it to end. And then I'm going to actually change where it starts. But I'm going to set up the keyframes and the tween first and then do my movement. So on the sun layer, which for me is the only one that's unlocked, I'm going to go out to frame 30 where it says 1 second and select that frame, and I'm going to create a keyframe this time. I'm going to use F6, which makes a keyframe, or you can use this little icon. Just make sure and change it to keyframe. Every time I change it, I keep accidentally making another one, so I'm hitting undo, Command Z to do that. So now we've got our 2 keyframes, and I'm going to right-click anywhere in the middle, in between these 2 keyframes, and choose Create Classic Tween. Once again, motion tween is something that works a little bit differently, and I'll show you that at some point. But for right now, we're going to use all classic tweens because that's much better for creating interactivity, as you'll see later on. So we've created our tween, so now we're ready for some animation. And what I want to do is I'm going to go back to frame 1, and I'm going to take my sun and I'm just going to drag it down at an angle under the hills, but I'm going to hold shift while I drag because that will force it to be at a 45-degree angle. So you can see as I'm holding shift, it forces it to either be perfectly horizontal, vertical, or to 45. So I'm going to drag it down to 45. I'm going to drag it more than just under like this. I'm going to drag it like way down here because I know that I'm going to end up adding some little rays sticking out of this sun and spinning it around. So I want to give it enough room for those rays I'm going to add to be buried also. So I'm going to drag it way down here. And then now that I have my sun down there, I can kind of scrub through this timeline and see my sun kind of rise and come up out of there. All right, so once you have that, you can save your file, and now's a good time to actually test this in the browser and see what that motion really looks like. Like, it's one thing to scrub through it and make sure, yes, that's actually animating. It's one thing to hit your little play icon here, which will kind of play through it. But you always really want to test things in the browser, because there can be certain little unexpected inconsistencies, and the browser is always going to be how the end user is going to end up seeing it. So once I have my sun rising like this, I'm going to hit Command Return to open it in my browser. And I can see my sun just kind of mechanically rising and sticking up there. So yes, what we'd like to do is, instead of that being mechanical and the way it just kind of stops, almost all motion either eases in or eases out at the keyframes. So you can select anywhere in this tween, anywhere in this little purple, and it should show you the frame properties down here. And you can see the default classic ease. I'll show you later messing around with all of these different ease settings, but for right now, we can just leave it on classic ease. And you can drag this little 0 either to -100 to ease in or +100 to ease out. So once again, I'll show you the difference here. If I put it on -100 to ease in and I test my movie, then the sun kind of is slow in the beginning and then snaps at the end. But that's kind of the opposite of what we would expect for our little sunrise. Instead, we want to drag this all the way over to 100, so it kind of says classic ease out. And then if I test it, there we go. You can almost hear that little yellow sun going, much smoother. It just eases into place. All right, now I typically, when I create a tween, I just go ahead and set the easing right away, even before I animate for the most part. The next thing we want to do is we want to animate the sky and the ground to start off kind of dark, as if it's nighttime, and get lighter as the sun rises. So we want to actually animate the color. What we'd like to do is, I'm going to go ahead and lock my sun layer, because I don't need that anymore, and I'm going to animate the sky first. Okay, so I'm unlocking my sky layer. And first thing is, I want to set up an animation, because I know that I'm going to want my sky to animate the color in the exact same timing and the exact same easing. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up on my sky layer. It's already the only thing in the layer. It's already a symbol, so I can go ahead and start keyframing and tweening. But I'm going to put a keyframe on frame 30 with F6, just like I did there. And then I'm going to right-click anywhere in between and choose Create Classic Tween. And then while that's selected, like as soon as I hit Create Classic Tween, that frame and that tween is always already selected in the Properties panel. So I'm going to go ahead, and while that's open, I'm going to drag this easing number over to 100 to make it say Classic Ease Out. So now my timing and my easing are exactly the same in my sky. All right, now that that's set up, I want to show you kind of the pitfall way, and then I'll show you the way around it to actually animate the color of this sky. So we have our keyframes and we have our tween all set up. So again, the sky and the ground are actually the color that I want them to end up as. This is the color they look like they should be when the sun is high up in the sky. But if I go back to frame 1, I'm going to want these to be a little bit darker. So on my sky layer, I'm going to select the sky object on the stage. I'm going to be careful not to double click. I don't want to go inside of it and go into its timeline. I want to stay on the main timeline and just click once to select it on the stage. And when I have it selected on the stage, then I can go over here in the Properties panel under Object and under Color Effects. You can see Brightness, Tint, Advanced, and Alpha. All right, let's go ahead and go to Tint. And you can see that what Tint does is it allows you to play with the red, green, and blue channel, but in the most part, you want to take this tint amount and set it to 100. We want to tint this 100%. And then I'm going to change the color to some kind of darker blue, maybe like this, so that as I scrub through my animation and the tween takes over, I can see that my sky is animating and getting brighter as the sun comes up. Pretty cool, right? Nice little touch. So go ahead and do that. Set up that tween. Give yourself a little tint that changes like that. And we're going to do something similar to the ground, so that also changes. But before we do that, I want to test this in the browser and see the pitfall. So once you get that set up, you have your sky keyframed and tweened and have the color tinted like that and animating. Now I'm going to hit Command Return to open it in the browser. And notice what's happening. The color is not changing at all. All right, so the pitfall, the problem, is that for whatever reason, HTML5 in the browser does not understand the tint change. It just doesn't like it. I don't know why, and I wish they would just gray it out in the interface so you can't use it. But it's important to understand as you're animating that there's a way around this. So if I go back and I select my sky where I made the tint, under this color effects, there's none, which takes everything away. There's brightness, tint, advanced, and alpha. Alpha is what fades things in and out. Now, from what I've gathered, that using brightness or tint or advanced just simply does not work when we're using HTML5. The only one that does work is using alpha, where we can fade an object completely in and out using opacity. All right, so knowing that, I still want to give it this effect where it's getting darker and fading to a lighter color. So knowing that we can't use tint and that we can only use alpha, instead of tinting, we can actually fade out our sky and make our background color the lighter sky color and have it just fade one object out onto the lighter one. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is, first off, I'm going to go back and get rid of that tint that I did. I'm going to set that back to none. All right, so I'm back to having just my nice bright blue color. Now this bright blue color is actually the color that I'm going to want it to fade out to. So before I change this, I'm going to change my stage to be that color. All right, the stage that's underneath it. Like right now, if I were to hide my sky layer, you could see the white underneath. Don't want it to be white, so I'm going to take this stage color right here, and I'm just going to go take the eyedropper tool and snag that blue. So now if I hide my sky layer, hide it and show it again, I can't see a difference just because my stage underneath it is blue. Of course, if I hid my ground layer, I would be able to see that blue underneath there. All right, now I do want to change my sky color itself to that darker color now, so we can actually see a difference when we fade it out. So because I've already got keyframes and tweens on here, I actually want to double click on my sky to go inside of it before I change the color, because that tint method of changing the color just won't work. But if I go inside of it, double click, and now I just see the layer one, I see only my sky object, I see the little breadcrumb trail up here, scene one, sky. And with my fill color, I'm now going to switch this and change it to be this darker nighttime color that I wanted. Now once I've changed my sky to this darker color, I'm going to use the breadcrumb trail and click on scene one, or the arrow just moves in that direction, but we're only one level deep right now. And now all I have to do is fade out my sky. So the first keyframe is how it should be. And then as I get towards my last keyframe at the 1 second point, I actually want to fade this sky out so it will reveal the lighter stage color underneath. So to do that, I'm going to select the sky, go over to color effects and choose alpha, and then I can drag that all the way down to 0. Once I've done that, I can scrub through and I can see the exact same effect that we saw before, where my lighter sky or my darker sky is fading lighter and lighter as the sun comes up. But this time, if I test it in my browser, because we're just using alpha and not tint, now it actually works. And you can see it goes a little faster and it keeps the same timing and the same easing, so it feels like it goes together and it feels like it fits. I'm going to save my file, file save. So the next step is I want to do this with the ground. Okay, I also want the ground to be able to fade and get lighter from a darker version. But now we can't use the same trick, or at least in the same way, because we already have the stage set to blue. We can't also set the stage to green. We're going to make a copy and duplicate this actual ground layer, make a carbon copy of it, and have one layer underneath it, this color that we want it to end up as, and have another copy on top of it, the darker color, that will fade out. All right, so let's go ahead and let's see, can we duplicate the layer? Yeah, that's a thing. So just go over to your ground layer, right click, and choose duplicate layers. And that will just make a ground copy. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna name it ground light and ground dark. So I'm gonna name this ground underscore light for the one on the bottom, and then my ground copy that I made, I'm going to call it ground underscore dark, so I can see the difference between the two. All right, right now, these are both copies of the same symbol right now. So regardless of which one I were to look at, if I were to hide ground light so I only see ground dark, well, if I were to hide ground dark so I only see ground light, I'm gonna lock my sky layer so I don't mess that up. If I were to just double click and go in here and like change the color of this, it's gonna change them both because they're both the same symbol. So what I'm gonna wanna do is take one of these and make it not a symbol anymore, okay? So I'm gonna lock and hide ground dark because that's the one we're actually gonna change. That's the one we're gonna fade out. I'm gonna leave ground light. And what I wanna do is I wanna make this not a symbol anymore. If you don't remember how to do that, there is, it's called break apart. So when I have the symbol selected, there's this little button right here which shows the kind of 3 squares called break apart, or you can go to modify, break apart, or you can right click on it and choose break apart, or you can use the hotkey, which is what I use, which it shows you right here in the right click menu, Command B or Control B if you're on Windows. So however you want to do it, you can use the interface, right click menu, pull down menu, hotkey. But what we want to do is break this symbol apart. I'm just going to go Command B, and that just broke it apart. So now you can see the pixels and it's the individual shape. All right, and once I've broken apart that ground light layer, I'm going to lock it because that's all I need. And then in the ground dark layer, I'm now going to unlock that and unhide it. And now this is the one that's my original ground symbol. So all I want to do now is just go inside of this, double click it, and now I want to change the color to be that darker ground color. Now I actually still have that little line that we drew in this symbol also. So I also want to change the color of that little line, and I'm going to try and use that later for something else. So we want to keep that intact if you've got it. And notice that I can click it and it selects almost the whole thing. It looks like the ends here didn't select all of the ends on either end. So I'm going to hold Shift and just click and make sure that I get that whole line. I'm going to try and move it a little. No, there's still a little bit over here it's not getting. There we go. I'm just shift clicking to get the whole thing. Geez, it doesn't like that little end. That should do it. All right, that'll be good enough. So anyway, I'm just making sure that my fill is also, whoops. I guess if I select everything totally by either clicking the keyframe or I can region select around the entire thing, I guess I can just change the color of my stroke to match my fill, and that should change that. Whoops. There we go. Stop it. There we go. So now they're both the same color. All right. So again, just kind of point out that there's that extra line there that we may use down the line. So change the color of both the fill and the stroke of my rolling hilltops here. I'm going to go back up a level. And now that we've got our two pieces intact, if I hide the ground dark layer, I can see the ground light layer underneath it. So the actual symbol in the library of the ground is the darker version. And now I can go ahead and animate that fading out in the exact same way that I animated the sky. So if I turn that on, so now I'm going to go ahead and keyframe at frame 30 with F6. Right click between them, create classic tween. Drag the easing over as soon as that tween is created to classic ease out or positive 100. So now the animation is all set up. Now I just have to go to the end of the animation, select the ground, and change its alpha to 0. So it will fade out. All right, so it should look something like this. I'm going to save my file. I'm going to test it in the browser with Command Return. And you can see that it's subtle, it's quick, but you can see that both the sky and the ground are kind of fading from those darker colors and getting lighter as the sun rises. And okay, so far we made some symbols, we made some simple keyframe animations with tweens, we made sure our easing is good. We kind of got around this pitfall of tint not working and used the alpha to kind of fade it out to other things underneath to give it this nice effect. So the next thing I want to teach you about is rotation, because there's a couple of different kind of pitches in the way rotation works and a couple of different ways to do rotation. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add some little sun rays to our sun. So I'd like you to just lock every layer except for the sun layer. I'm going to unlock the sun layer. And over here on frame 30, where the sun is high up in the sky, I'm going to double click on it to go inside of it. Now I think you do have to be actually over a keyframe. Oh, no, you don't. Okay, whatever. But anyway, on frame 30, I want to double click on the sun to be inside of the sun's symbol. We've got scene 1 and then the sun's graphic symbol, and you can see the sky and the ground kind of get a little pastel and fade it out to kind of show that they're not part of that, but it still shows you the context of the symbol. So what I want you to do is let's go ahead and rename this layer 1 and call it, I don't know, let's call it center. This will be the center of our sun, and then just lock it. We're not going to need to create a symbol because we're not going to actually animate that. But now, with that locked, I want to make a new layer above it and name it rays. All right, and on the rays layer, I am once again going to use the pencil tool. Actually, in this case, I just use the brush tool. You've got the classic brush tool, which has much less options versus the other brush tool, which has more options. But anyway, regardless, I'm going to choose some kind of like orangey color. And I'm going to draw, oh, that's a little thick. I'm going to bring my size down to like 2 perhaps. And just going to draw some rays around the sun. Nice little squiggles. Maybe I'll make mine a little thicker. Up to 4, and I'm using a stylus so it's keeping track of all of my pressure and angles and all kinds of stuff. There we go. So just draw yourself some nice little sun rays. They don't have to be squiggles. They can be straight lines. They can be whatever you want. Just make yourself some nice little rays around the sun. And when you're done, you just leave that layer unlocked. Let's go back up to the main scene. Once you've drawn some rays around your sun, I'll give you a minute to go ahead and do that. When you've done it, you should be able to scrub through your animation and see that the rays, because we added them inside of the symbol, and that symbol's already animated, that they're nicely following along. If your rays are too big and they're sticking out at the beginning down here, you can always just grab your sun object. You could hide your ground layers. You could grab your sun object and drag it a little bit lower to hide it under there, or you could even go back inside of the sun object and adjust your rays if you wanted to make sure they fit. But do your best to make it so you've got some cool sun rays and they are fitting to go all the way behind your mountainous landscape, your rolling hills. And hit save on that. All right, so now I want to rotate this thing around. So I'm going to show you how this is going to work. First thing I want you to do is go ahead and go to frame 30, select your sun, and then choose the free transform tool. This is the easiest way to rotate, but there is kind of a pitfall with it, and I want to show you how that works. So we're going to take the free transform tool here. What I want you to do is select somewhere outside of one of these corners so you see the actual icon changing to this little circular arrow. And I want you to drag and rotate it to about 180 degrees. Just rotate it completely upside down from where you started. And once you do that, then you can test your animation. You can kind of scrub through the timeline, or you can test it in the browser and see that sure enough, your sun is rotating, easing into place. Very nice. But now I want to show you where rotating by hand with the free transform tool breaks down. It was easy enough to go ahead and rotate that 180 degrees, but let's say I wanted to rotate this in a full circle. What you should try next is take this and continue rotating in the same place you were and go to almost a full circle. Not quite a full circle like that, but almost. So give it a couple of degrees, it would still have to go to finish that full circle. And this time, if you check your animation, you can see what happened. That instead of going all the way around, it stops short and thinks it's smarter than you and tries to take the shortest distance between the 2 points and just starts to rotate backwards the other way. All right, so when you are rotating things by hand using the free transform tool, you can only really ever get about halfway around. Now you could technically do a full circle by adding another keyframe in the middle, and you could like rotate it half of the way and then have this second tween from another keyframe rotated it the other half of the way. And you might be able to get it look pretty smooth. There might be a little hitch right in the middle or something like that. It is possible to do that way, but there's a better way to rotate things into a full circle. So I'm going to start by going to frame 30, and I'm going to undo a few times until before I even rotated it at all. I think is there. Nope, one more undo. It flipped back around. There we go. All right, so I was just hitting Command Z and undoing back to where I have just a solid sun moving with no rotation. All right, now the other way to rotate, besides just grabbing it with a free transform tool and rotating it on screen, another way is you can do it through the tween itself in the same way that we do easy, which is pretty cool. So select that sun tween in some way. Select anywhere in between the keyframes and the sun tween, and then look over at the properties panel and you'll see this rotate drop down that's set to auto for right now. Auto just means it's going to rotate however you do it manually. But then you can change it to clockwise or counterclockwise. I'm going to go ahead and set mine to clockwise. And by default, it has a little 1 next to it. And what that means is it will go ahead and automatically rotate 1 full rotation for the timeline of that tween. So I can go all the way around a full circle like that. So if I test it in the browser now, it spins all the way up and goes to the full speed. There goes the full way around. So if you ever want to take something in a full revolution beyond 180 degrees, you can use it like this. Right? Now another thing is, let's say, okay, so that's spinning up into the air. That's great. Maybe I want it to spin a little faster. Let's try 2 or 3 on this. So again, I can just select the tween itself. You see what it looks like with 2. Starting to spin quite a bit faster. Even at only 2, it's getting that kind of wheel going down the highway effect where it almost looks like it's spinning the wrong way for a moment when it spins into place. Of course, you probably want to just see what happens if you put in like 100 or 1,000 or something, which you can totally do. But you're going to all of a sudden get some wacky effects. So as you can see, I put in 100. And strangely, like when I look at it in the browser, it's just kind of all over the place. But when I look at it in my timeline, it's literally skewing and making my sun go all chaos, which is really weird to see that it looks like this in the timeline and it doesn't do this in the browser. It actually keeps it just spinning. So that's just something to point out as you're playing with this, that you can definitely blow it up. You can even put like 1,000, try to make it spin 1,000 times in a second, and it just does all kinds of crazy things. But for our purposes, I want you to bring it back. Whoops, again, you have to select the tween. Bring it back to just 1 clockwise revolution. All right, so it just goes once, because the next step is I don't want it to just spin up and then stop. I want it to continue spinning as it goes along and sits in the sky. All right, so let's try and set that up, and then I'll show you where we'll run into an issue with our easing, and we'll have to go put our thinking caps on and go another level deeper to take care of it. So what I want is, okay, for the first 1 second, it is indeed spinning once around. So what I can do is I'm going to want to set up a tween on my sun for these next 2 seconds, and I'm going to want it to tell it to rotate twice over this next spot. So that way, if it's rotating once for the first second and then rotating twice over the next 2 seconds, then it should be kind of spinning all at the same speed, right? We'll run into an issue with our easing, but I'll show you what I mean. So the first step is, let's go ahead and put another keyframe on our sun layer all the way over on frame 90 where it's 3 seconds long. Again, F6 for the keyframe. And then once I've got that keyframe in place, now I'm going to right-click in between these 2 keyframes and choose Create Classic Tween. Make my tween on my sun. And then with my tween selected, I'm going to go ahead and select anywhere in between these 2 keyframes, select the actual tween, and now I can change this rotate on the tween. Again, I'll change it to clockwise, and then I'll set it to 2, because I want it to rotate once every 1 second. And then it's continuing to spin, but if I look at it in the browser, you can see that it's not continuous, right? That because we have that easing on that first one where the sun is rising, because we want that sun to ease into place, that spinning of the sun also eases. And then as soon as it hits that second one, there's no easing, it's just spinning around. So let me see how I can use the easing to make that a little smoother. So if like this one is easing out, maybe I could make this ease in. See how that works. Check that out. Okay, so that's a little smoother where it slows down and then slowly gets back going again. So that kind of helps, but really that's not the effect I'm looking for. I could go the other way, where I ease this completely out and make the other one ease in. Check that out. That's really ugly, spins really fast, and it's also making my sun kind of snap up into the sky, all right? So the only thing we can really do on this timeline to resolve this is to get rid of our easing completely, which isn't exactly what I want to do. I'm going to show you that if I set the ease to 0 on both of these and then test it out, you can see that the spinning actually stays consistent the entire time because it has the same ease and it's just spinning one rotation for each second. But in order to get that, we had to cut out our nice easing of our sun that would easily rest into place. And we weren't able to get both of those effects at the same time. But there is a way. There is a way to get a little deeper and do this a little differently so that we can get the best of both worlds, and our sun will continuously keep spinning at the same speed, but we can also ease it up into position. We can animate these rays spinning inside of the symbol itself, and we can take this to an extra level and actually put a symbol inside of a symbol. I'm going to show you how that works. So for right now, what we want to do is we want to get rid of all of the rotating that we've done so far. So I'm actually going to use undo, and I'm going to keep going back until before I created these keyframes and these tweens for the second. And then I'm going to keep going back until I have no rotation whatsoever. That might be it. Nope. I was playing, I got to go back before I was setting it to 100 and all that good stuff. Keep hitting undo. There we go. All right, so I'm back to having no rotation and just have my rays in the sky. So go ahead and do that. Get yourself back to not having any rotation at all. Should be able to undo back to that point, or you should be able to just click auto or none from the rotate thing. Might do the same thing. And once you're ready, once you're back down to having no rotation whatsoever, I want you to go to frame 30. I want you to double click to go inside of your sun. I'll give you a minute to catch up here. Make sure you're on no rotation on the main timeline. Your sun's just rising with that nice ease. Again, make sure that your sun has that ease out, because that's the whole part we're trying to retain. We want that sun to still ease, but we want it to spin consistently the entire time. All right, once you've got to that point, go inside of your sun. And now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to animate these rays spinning in a circle inside of this timeline. And this is another major building block. After learning how to make symbols and learning how to make keyframes and tweens and use easing to just move things around, we're going to expand our minds to animate symbols inside of symbols. We're going to start nesting symbols inside of each other. And that can get very hairy, but it can also be very powerful to be able to nest timelines like this. Now, before we just start adding frames and adding keyframes, because we're essentially going to do the same thing. We're going to keyframe a second of time, make a tween, and we're going to use that auto clockwise rotate to just rotate it once. But if we were to just start doing that right now, we would get evil tweens. Even though we're inside of a symbol, the two golden rules of animation still fully apply. That it does not matter how many levels deep. We could be 7 symbols deep. We could be a symbol inside of a symbol inside of a symbol and so on. But at some level, we're always on a particular timeline. And whichever timeline you happen to be on, again, no matter how many levels deep you are, whichever timeline you happen to be on, the two golden rules of animation still apply. So unless we want evil tweens and we want the program to just automatically generate tweens for us, which is going to cause chaos, we need to actually make these rays into a symbol. Even though we're inside the symbol, the sun symbol, these are still just shapes in here. We've got a center little yellow circle, and we've got these rays. So I want to make a symbol inside of a symbol. I'm going to select all of these rays. Again, my center layer is locked, so I can't get to it. And because these are all squiggles, instead of just shift clicking each individual one, making sure I don't miss a pixel here or anything, I'm actually just going to marquee select around them all to select them all. Or you could also click on the keyframe itself on frame 1, which will select everything. Sometimes when I want to make sure I have a selection, I'll nudge it. You can either click and drag and then undo, or you could actually use the arrow keys on the keyboard. One press of each arrow key will only move something 1 pixel. You can undo, or if you hold shift when you press the arrow keys, it'll move 10 pixels. So a lot of times when I'm checking, oh, do I have everything selected? I'll kind of shift arrow key a couple times one way, bring it back, or I'll drag it, move it, undo and bring it back, just to make sure I have everything grabbed. So with everything selected like this, now I want to make a symbol. Again, even though I'm in a symbol, I can nest this and put a symbol inside of it. So I'm going to use F8 again, or you can use the convert to symbol icon or the right-click menu or the drop-down menu. And I'm going to name this, I'll just call it rays. Make sure it's a graphic symbol. We definitely want to keep this registration point in the center because that's what it's going to rotate around. And if we put this on one of the corners and we want to rotate it, it's not going to be the effect we want. So make sure it's a graphic symbol named rays, registration point in the center, hit OK. Now we have our rays symbol. And now we can go, if we can make our animation. So I want this to be 1 second long. So we can go ahead and set this all up in the same way we did on the main timeline. I'm going to select both of these frames so I get both layers go all the way out to frame 30, 1 second long. Hit F5 or insert frame, not keyframe, just frame, because we don't want to keyframe anything on the center layer. All right, and then now that we've got some time to work with, now I can set up my 1 second full circle animation. So this rays, it is a symbol. It is the only symbol on its layer, even though we're another symbol layer deep, doesn't matter. So I can still go to frame 30, F6 to create a keyframe, right click in the middle, create classic tween. Now this is one of the few cases where we do not want any easing. Because we're just going to do a full circle that's going to be looping, if we put any kind of ease on it, it's not just going to be a consistent like wheel moving. It's going to like slow and stop or start and slow every time around. And we don't want that. So we can leave the easing at 0. But I want to set this rotate clockwise to 1. Now yours might be a little janky. Mine's a little janky. It's not perfectly in the center, which is fine. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's more of showing you that now that I've rotated this thing inside of this symbol, the way Animate works is each timeline, no matter how nested and how deep it is, each timeline will automatically loop itself. So even though our main timeline is 90 frames or 3 seconds long, and this one inside of it is only 1 second long, this animation is going to continue to jump back to the beginning and continue to loop for as long as it goes. So now that I've got that, if I go back up, so as we go, because we're using graphic symbols, the stage will actually update and show us what's going on inside of that symbol. So now we actually have the best of both worlds. As we animate up, our sun is resting and easing into place. And then our sun is continuing to spin for as long as we leave it on the timeline, and it all does it at the exact same speed. So I'm going to save my scene and then open it in the browser and see that that is the effect we were looking for. Is now we get both, is that we do have this spinning animation, which is just happening independently inside of that sun symbol. But no matter what we do with that sun symbol on the main timeline, right now we're just making it rise and ease into place, but we could have it scale and fade in and out and zip all over the sky like it's a UFO. And no matter how much we animate it on the main timeline, it's going to constantly and consistently spin because that's a secondary motion that's going on inside of that symbol. But that should be it. So like I said, kind of redoing a lot of the building blocks that we've started with, making symbols, making layers, keyframes and tweens, easing, and really just showing you kind of two pitfalls. One with changing color, where we kind of have to fade things out on top of something else rather than use tint. And then also using rotation, that if you're rotating by hand with a free transform tool, you can really only get about halfway around before it starts going the other way. And you can rotate with the tween to go in full circles. And then we took it another level deep where we put a symbol inside of a symbol. So we could actually click, and I just double clicked twice. So from the main scene, I can double click to get inside of my sun symbol. I can see the breadcrumb trail. And then from my sun symbol, where I've got my rays animated here, I can actually double click on my rays to get inside of that. And now I can see that my breadcrumb trail is 3 levels deep: rays, sun, or scene 1. I can click on any level to get directly to it. So you can see the layers change, our main timeline that has all these keyframes and tweens going on, and then our sun timeline that has the center and the rays, and then you've got the actual rays timeline, which has nothing in it right now but the initial layer 1 and these basic ray shapes. But that's the level we would have to go to if we decided we wanted to edit these. All right, so just an introduction to nesting symbols and putting symbols inside of each other, which later on, as we start making things interactive and grouping things and organizing things, we're going to take that much deeper. So just wrapping your head around that initial part.